and been very fortunate enough to bring myself up to now being the programs manager of the Harvard Crimson, which is one of the departments of the three departments of the Harvard Crimson Business Board, right next to the advertising department and strategy department. And it's been a great honor. It's been a great pleasure to do that as one of my extracurriculars here at Harvard. But I want to hand it over to Nigel, give a chance to introduce himself and give some more color on what we do here at the Harvard Crimson and the programs department.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Matthew. Hi, everybody. My name is Nigel, Nigel Savage. I am from the great state of Georgia. I am a rising sophomore at Harvard. I am also on the programs team. I'm an associate with Matthew. I've joined the Crimson Business Board in the fall semester of my freshman year. So I've been a part of the Crimson pretty much as long as I've been a part of Harvard in and of itself. So it's been really integral to my time here and really something I love. So I'd love to kind of give you guys a brief overview of what we do on the business side. So kind of you guys can see what it says on the slide, but I think I'll kind of talk about that and then also talk about like bigger. So broader, the Crimson as a self is like a news organization with a bunch of different boards ranging from sports to editorial to arts. And they, produce amazing work. This past year, there were a lot of really interesting stories coming out of Harvard. And the Crimson was, time after time, the first to break them, beating the New York Times and other very reputable sources in the country. There have been a lot of really, really impactful people like, President FDR, a lot of Pulitzer Prize winners to come out of the Crimson. And really how I like to think about the business side is, we're just here to make sure that the lights stay on, that the people who are writing the stories are able to keep on doing their job and make sure that they don't have to think about where how to make sure everything keeps going. That's our mission, that's our purpose. And I think that's kind of what drew me is I wanted to learn about business, get those skills, but also be part of an organization that had a mission and had a value set that kind of aligned with mine. So as Matthew talked about, we're on the program side, but there's different sides, different business segments, and that's advertising, marketing, also strategy, and then also global education programs, which is kind of the side that we're on. So I'll kind of give a little bit of a brief talk about what each of those does. So advertising, kind of the name, they work on securing partnerships. So this past year we did a really big deal with Uber Eats. College students love eating out. Did a deal with them, kind of stuff like that. Strategy and marketing, as you see there, they're kind of thinking about ways to grow the business and also kind of designing everything that happens. So all the advertisements that we display kind of runs through marketing and making sure that it looks pretty and it goes up right. And then the global education programs is kind of like what Matt and I do. And that's working with students from around the country and around the globe, kind of working with them to help them learn about journalism and business and kind of bring in those students and work with them and kind of it's a way that we make money but also give back to the community and help teach. It's kind of a broad overview of the Crimson and also like the business sector of that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much, Nigel, for that. On that note, obviously, we've been around for a long time. We've been able to work with some fantastic partners, and Arthur Smith has been one of them. So we would love to give the floor to them and have them, kind of take the reins from here.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Nigel. Hi, everybody. Good evening. My name's Arthur Smith. Fellas, again, thanks for the intro. We really value our partnership with you guys and appreciate the work you do, especially when you get to work with these summer programs with high school kids. And I know for the folks signing in, you're going to get a chance to hear from Matthew and Nigel again later in the evening. What I'm going to do for the next half an hour or so is talk about the college admissions process and provide hopefully some tips for folks in this crazy world that we live in a changing landscape of college admissions. But we really wanted to partner with Harvard Crimson tonight because they offer some great opportunities, I think, for students who are trying to find ways to develop interests and build up a resume to be able to do that. As we go through the evening, I would ask folks, if you have some questions, to please take advantage of the chat box. We recommend that you switch to the everyone. I think when you go into the chat box, you have the chance to send the questions either just to the panelists or to everyone, or send it to everybody so people can see the questions. Two of my trusted colleagues, Kevin Miles, who is the COO of my firm, Arthur Smith Advising, also a college counselor, and Brandon Crystal, who is a senior college counselor with my firm. They're going to be taking turns answering questions that you may have during the course of my presentation. And they may save a few of those for me to address at the end. So I hope folks won't be shy about putting in questions. Again, into the chat box, please. I would encourage you to take advantage of the everyone option so that everyone can actually see the questions and see the answers. So bear with me as I share my screen here to begin the presentation for the evening. College admissions is a complicated adventure these days. I liken it to a jigsaw puzzle, and I hope the tips I'm going to give you tonight will help make the completion of that jigsaw puzzle more successful so that you can achieve your goals in the college application process. Real quickly, a little bit more about me. I did my undergraduate work at Cornell, where I studied history and Africana studies, and then did my graduate work at Duke University, where I received both my master's and my PhD in history. I returned to Cornell. I worked there for over 20 years, and for 15 of those years, I worked in undergraduate admissions in a variety of roles. I was an assistant director of admissions and also an assistant dean for admissions advising in the College of Arts and Sciences. And in that role, and throughout those roles, I evaluated more applications than I care to keep track of, more than 20,000, at least when I stopped counting. So I don't say that to make you feel impressed. You can feel a little bit sorry for me that I've had to evaluate that many applications during the course of my career. But hopefully that perspective in chairing admissions committees and making decisions and the years I've had in that will provide some useful vantage points for all of you as you're coming up to the table to present your application to these faceless people on the other side. I'm going to hope to give you some insight into what those folks think. Now, the other part of my background, for anyone that's actually interested, is I was a college and track and cross-country coach for 23 years, 3 years at Duke, 20 years at Cornell. At the end of my tenure as a college coach, I was the head track and field and cross-country coach at Cornell. And I bring that up, not because I'm here to tell you about running, but my colleagues and I really think of each other as coaches, but in the context of college admissions. We're here to help folks find success in a complicated process. And like in many areas of our lives, having a coach who's in your corner to help you achieve your goals and find the best path for you. That's what good coaches do. That's what we do here at Arthur Smith Advising. We provide, and in doing that coaching, we provide one-on-one virtual counseling sessions. We work with students all over the country, indeed all over the world. And we take students on at any stage of their high school career. For those of you that may be interested after tonight's presentation, I encourage you to set up a 30-minute complimentary consult with us. For students on the call, we do require that if you're going to do a consult with us, we would like to have your parents also on the call so that we can answer everybody's questions and see in explaining our services if this is something that might actually be able to help you. And if it's not, maybe at the very least you get a good pointer or two. But again, if you're interested in a free complimentary consult to see how our services might help you, if you and your parents want to attend, the QR code here, you can scan that and find a link to set up a meeting with us. Very proud of the results of our students over the last 4 years. One statistic that I am proud of that I keep track of is that 90% of our students have been admitted to at least one of their top 3 choices. And one of my philosophies here is making sure that students get excited about multiple options. Obviously, in the end, there's going to be that place that is the dream that you want to attend, but it's important to get excited about multiple options. And because of that, we help students put together what I would call pretty diverse lists, both aspirational schools, but also being creative in uncovering appropriate target schools and further backup schools. And because of that, our students the last 4 years have been admitted to a lot of different universities. No 2 lists amongst our students are the same. And I'm proud to tell you that they've been admitted to more than 300 different universities over the last last several years. In particular, the last two classes have seen results at lots of different colleges, including all of the schools you see represented here with their logos and insignia, but certainly others as well. And sure, happy to tell you that students who work with us who have high ambitions in terms of very selective schools tend to do very well in working with us. You can see the results kind of described there. Certainly all of the schools in the US News top 25 rankings our students have been admitted to in the past year, and certainly multiple admits to a lot of really top selective schools. So I'm proud of that, but I want to go back to my earlier point. We're here, and my advice tonight is to guide people to find the best choice for them. And sometimes that's a school that's super well known, that's really highly ranked. And sometimes maybe it's a school that you didn't know about before, doesn't appear on everybody's bumper sticker, but it could be the best school for you. And that's what's really rewarding for us. So in speaking with you tonight to help maybe give you some insights that could be useful as you work through college applications in this process, there's a few things I want to do my best to address. We're going to start with what's changed in the admissions landscape, and there have been several significant changes the last few years that you should be aware of. I also want to talk to you about how these colleges and universities actually read and evaluate. What's their process? What are they looking for? What's the process in place that they have? If you're not aware of kind of how they do it, you might go down the wrong path with your application. And then I'm going to give some suggestions on what you need to be doing to stand out in this process, some advice on areas to focus on prior to your senior year. I'm going to have a suggested timeline for any families with kids that are upperclassmen, rising upperclassmen in high school that are on this call. I'm going to be a little bit more specific on how these different, disparate elements can kind of come together to form your final puzzle. And then some thoughts and takeaways before I hand things back off to Matthew and Nigel at the end. And again, as I go through, if you have any questions, I hope you'll take advantage of the chat box. My colleagues, Kevin and Brandon, will do their best to answer. They're great. And we'll have a conversation at the end as well. So let's begin with, what's changed. Since the pandemic began, perhaps the single biggest change that I've witnessed in my nearly 25 years of working in higher ed, and that is that many colleges and universities moved to a test optional model, meaning that they no longer require the submission of standardized tests like the SAT or the ACT. Now, students that we work with were often of the opinion that just because these schools were not requiring tests, I don't need to submit it. If they're not requiring it, I don't need to do that. That's not really the approach that we have wanted our students to take, and not the philosophy we want people to think about. Even if a school is test optional, and the majority of colleges and universities in this country are still test optional, people need to think of this as an opportunity, test opportunity. There, as I'll talk about in a couple of slides, there are several factors that go into a successful application. And although a school that is test optional is signaling that they don't need your test score to admit you, the statistics reveal the reality is that a strong test score will help you. Why would you not give yourself that chance to help yourself? It's an opportunity to find another important piece of this puzzle to stand out. So yes, the SAT and the ACT still matter, even at schools that are test optional, which again, they're saying we're not requiring this, but hey, if you want to go ahead and submit it, well, hint, hint, something that's an option is an opportunity, and we want to do our best with it. It should also be noted that at several of the very elite institutions in the country, meaning elite, meaning the most competitive to get into, they've been returning to standardized testing this spring and summer. By a year from now, 5 of the 8 Ivies at least will be requiring testing again. None of them required it the last few years because of the pandemic, but at least 5 of the 8 have already announced that they'll be changing back. Same with Stanford. It's important to know that at the very, very selective schools, they've decided that even though they were comfortable admitting people the last few years without testing, that they feel like they can do a better job by requiring that. Now, one of the questions we get all of the time is, okay, this school is still test optional. How do I know whether I should be submitting that test score or not? That's one of the things that we help people with. It's important to do a little bit of research into what historically has been a test result that has led to successful outcomes. We try to find, for example, the 25th to 75th percentile of admitted students at that school with either the SAT or the ACT. If you're in that band, you want to submit. If you're higher than that band, it's helping you a lot. If you're lower than that band, don't submit. But again, with some schools beginning to require these again, if you're a younger student, it behooves you to be preparing for them. And even if that school is test optional, why not help yourself with that added boost? Several other things have changed. I focused a lot on test optional on that page because that was huge. There was another big one this past summer. Just about a year ago, the Supreme Court made a monumental decision involving Harvard, stating that colleges and universities could no longer consider race or ethnicity as a factor in offering an admissions, making an admissions decision. What has that meant? Well, we're starting to see the impacts of that. I'll talk about that here a little bit. One of the interesting pieces of the decision from the Supreme Court was that although colleges could no longer consider what a student's race was, there was the opportunity for students to write in their essays about their lived experiences. And one of the interesting consequences of this decision is that nearly every selective institution added what's called a supplemental essay. I'll talk more about those later, that asked students to dig into their identity, their community, their lived experiences. And regardless of a student's background, I think this has been a great addition to an application because it's yet another opportunity for a student to share their unique journey, whatever that particular background may have been. So yes, in the application, you still check a box as to your race or ethnicity if you wish. It's always been optional, but if you wish. But no, that box is no longer shared with admissions offices anymore. So they are making decisions without regard to race or ethnicity, which I should add, the University of California system has been doing for a couple decades. Another thing that has changed significantly is how essays are viewed. For the young people on this call, you're all familiar with AI and ChatGPT, really exciting tools that are going to transform our workforce, are going to transform education. But one thing to be careful of is that these tools should not be used to replace your own voice. And one thing that admissions officers are still very leery of is any sense that an essay is not the actual work of the student. That could be from ChatGPT. It's pretty easy if you're an experienced admissions officer. ChatGPT is pretty good, but it's not that good yet. You can tell when it's ChatGPT and not the student voice. Similarly, you can tell when it's a well-intentioned parent or an English teacher or a college counselor who maybe is a little overzealous, where they've taken over the writing. One of the things that we try to do, and that I think we're very good at, is we will help students produce really good writing, but it's going to be maintained in your voice. It's not going to sound like a 50-year-old dude like me. The essay needs to sound like you. So keep that in mind, that these colleges do care that it's your work. And although they care about the quality of the writing, they're more interested, believe me, in the ideas. So don't get greedy and have it overly polished by an AI program or a parent. Write your words. One of the things we've seen in the last few years is that there's been a significant increase in the number of applications to these universities. That's clearly related, in my mind, to test optional policies. More students felt emboldened to apply to the most difficult schools to get into for good reason. But we did not see a corresponding increase in the number of admission staff. So I hate to tell you this because students put months and months into their applications, but at most institutions, only about 10 minutes is spent, maybe 15, on reading your application in total. That's kind of demoralizing when you hear it, but there are ways to make sure it stands out. So what I'm trying to get at is there's been a decreased amount of time in the last several years being spent on each application because the number of applications has gone through the roof. Now, in the past several months, I'm sure all of you have been following in the news, and that, it's for not the first time in American history, there's been significant student demonstrations young people giving voice to issues that are important to them. Campus unrest has indeed impacted, or I predict it will impact college admissions. Admissions people value student leaders, they value people that are passionate, but they also want to make sure that the people they are admitting to their institution get along. And one of the things that I know was concerning for so many people this past spring, no matter your perspective on the debates in the world, is that so many people in our polarized world seem to be talking past each other and not listening. This is not a comment on demonstrations. This is more a comment on people not listening to each other. And so when people are writing essays this year, when students are thinking about presenting resumes over the next 2 years, giving a sense of your cultural awareness, indeed your cultural competency. What do I mean by that? Your willingness to engage with people from a different background than you and be open-minded to different perspectives. You can have your strong opinion and your belief, and debate is healthy and good in an academic setting. But colleges are going to want to see people that are also willing to listen. And I am certain that essay topics in the next couple of years that focus on this would be a very positive response and be positively received, I should say, given a lot of the student unrest. Student unrest is a long and hallowed tradition in American higher education, but these colleges do want to make sure that people are going to be good citizens as well. So lots of things have changed in the last few years. Being mindful of standardized testing, impacts on essays, particularly because of the Supreme Court decision, impact of AI, campus unrest, things that are in the news. These are nuances that are, important to take into account. But the basic process by which highly selective schools, and in fact, most colleges and universities evaluate their applications, the process has not changed. Whether you're applying to the UC application system or applying to all the other schools that use what's called the Common Application, you'll submit that application online, and it is then received by the admissions office at the school, the institution, I should say, that you are directing it to. Now, these applications are received in the thousands, indeed the tens of thousands, and at some institutions more than 100,000. Contrary to what a lot of people presume, the first filter when these applications are received is not necessarily, in fact, rarely is it by academic major. The first filter is actually by geography and perhaps the larger, broader college within that university that you might be applying to. So if you're applying to the business college and not the engineering college, you haven't picked your major yet, but that college would be a first filter. But then it's about geography. Before they even get into the individual major, they want to know where you are coming from. So when I chaired admissions committees for the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell, I chaired the West Coast Committee. I did that for a long time. And the guy I inherited it from had done it for 20 years. For a little over 30 years, there were only 2 people who were in charge of all of those high schools for the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell. We knew our high schools in that region really, really well. And that's why these colleges filter first by high school. They are looking for exceptional candidates, the best candidates from each particular area. They want to bring in the best students from around the world. So the way to do that is not to compare someone who wants to do biology who lives in Los Angeles with a student in New York City who wants to do biology. That's a hard thing to compare, and they also don't want to end up with only biology majors. They want to look for the best and brightest in these different regions from all around the country and the world. A quick story that I like to share: when I inherited that region, my predecessor shared with me all of his notes through the years, and we got to a particular school in Southern California, and he said, "Artie, if you ever get an applicant and they got an A in the junior year AP English class at this high school, you really need to think about taking them." And I said, "Well, don't we always kind of look for A's in those junior year AP classes? And what about the other grades?" And he said to me, "Well, you see, this one teacher, I think he's great. The parents probably hate him, but he almost never gives A's. Yet there are great students." And this was a high school, by the way, that we would receive 25, 30 applications a year from, and we always took many students. It's a really good high school. He was admitting students who usually had B's in that class. He knew that high school so well that he knew when a particular teacher had a reputation for being a hard grader. And so I kept those notes, and sure enough, 3 or 4 years into my tenure, of chairing that committee, I got a student from that high school who had an A in that AP junior year English class. And this was a young woman who was also the editor for school paper. She wanted to be an English major. She was a good student and everything else, but not particularly off the charts, but clearly the best English student that we had seen at this school in several years. We admitted her. I'm sure glad we did. She became the editor of the school paper at Cornell. She recently won a Pulitzer Prize. She's a journalist now. What I'm trying to get across here in all of this is where you go to high school matters to the extent that that's your initial group of competitors. I hate to put it that way because these are your friends and classmates, but you're going to be judged by how well you are doing in your curriculum, first and foremost. And then at that point, they become very interested in what particular academic interests you have. And we'll get to that. The particular academic interests are important, but I'm spending a lot of time to just emphasize you want to make the most out of your particular high school experience because that's the first filter. We start going through applications. There's a committee for each region. I happen to chair mine, but I'd have individual readers that gave me their initial thoughts. Nobody gets admitted on the first read. People get refused on the first read. And then in the second and third reads, we move on to make our decisions. Now, I want to note whether you're applying through what's called the early round, applications that are due on usually November 1st, or the regular decision round, which is January 1st. This process is conducted very much the same way. What's the difference between those two application processes? There's in the early round, if you apply to a school that has what's called early decision and you commit to that institution, most of those schools have a significantly higher admit rate. Why is that? You're promising to attend. They're happy to reward that with a slightly wider door to get in. Still really hard, but wider door. Early action is the other type of the early round that is not binding. You can apply, in most cases, you can apply to multiple early action schools. You find out in the winter, you don't have to make up your mind until May, but it's nice to get things in and find out earlier. Regular decision, you apply in January. You'll find out around April 1st, make up your mind by May 1st, and you can apply to as many schools as you want in regular decision. Okay, whether you're applying early decision or regular decision, how do you stand out? It's a holistic process. What's that mean? It's a fancy word. It means that there are multiple factors that are under consideration. There's not ever one single thing, contrary to a popular opinion, that will get you in. I will say, however, if you don't have good grades and you do not have a very rigorous curriculum, that's almost impossible to overcome. Having a very demanding curriculum at your high school is the first thing that college admissions committees are looking for before they even look at your GPA. Of course, we want to have good grades. Don't misinterpret this, but it's always better to have a B in an AP class than an A in the regular class. Seriously, that's an important concept. Challenge yourself. Why is that? Old expression, the best predictor of what will happen is what has happened. These admissions committees want to know that you've challenged yourself because you will have to do that in college. I've already talked a lot about standardized tests. That's important, becoming more important again at the most selective institutions. But even for schools that are test optional, if you can add value with a test score that's competitive at that school, it's another piece here to this puzzle that you can place on the board. I talked on the last slide about how these application committees are organized geographically, but they do care what your intended academic interests are. Keep in mind that when you get to college, Harvard, Cornell, Williams, University of Michigan, whatever the institution is, you're going to have an opportunity to change your mind. These admissions people know that the vast majority of high school seniors who indicate one academic interest will probably end up majoring in something different once they actually get their feet on the ground in college. That's normal. That's encouraged. However, they want to see that you have the ability and the passion to develop an academic interest during high school that could be connected to something that they do offer. They acknowledge you might change your mind, but again, the best predictor of what will happen is what has happened. And if you've shown the ability to develop these academic interests, they're more confident that you can do the same in the next 4 years in college. And here's where having a unique academic interest makes a very important difference. There are lots of students these days who are very passionate about, the one I like to harp on is computer science. Great. If you want to be a computer scientist, I want you to be able to do that. However, In any particular geographical region, high school group, there's a lot of kids that want to do computer science. It's like going to the grocery store on Sunday and you want to get home to hang out with your friends, watch an NFL game, get home for dinner, whatever it may be. And you're going to the checkout line at the grocery store and there's 25 people in one line and they just opened up a new checkout line with only 2 or 3 people. I don't know anybody that wants to stay in the long line. You always go for the shorter line. It's the same concept here in selective admissions. I want people to find a line that matches with their resume, that matches with their eventual goals. But you do need to be careful that certain lines are going to be longer and more competitive than others. So if we have a biology major that can look for related life science majors at an institution, it's easier to stand out in that shorter line. Same with computer science, looking for related programs, whether that's applied math or info science or data science. That can be a really good strategy. So having academic interest that puts you in a line where you can stand out more is going to be very helpful. It's also really important to develop extracurricular activities, whether that's research or in your extracurricular activities, develop leadership that connect to your stated academic interests. On the one hand, you've got your transcript here that shows where you're good, what you're good at. Up here, you've indicated what it is that you want to try to pursue in college. Your extracurriculars are your chance to connect the dots between these two things, to show us that you are sincerely and genuinely interested and have the background and have shown that you can build up your passions. Things that you're going to hear more about later, I think, from Matthew and Nigel with the kinds of programs that Harvard Crimson Global Programs and their summer journalism things that they do, the things that Nigel talked about earlier, around marketing and advertising. If you have these kinds of social science interested programs that they offer can really help build up your resume in a neat way. And if you're a STEM student, there's certainly things you can do with research and internships. These are the kinds of things that we try to advise our younger students on finding opportunities in order to build up their resume in what I like to call a vertical way. We want to stack up experiences that are related to your interests. So you're doing all this. There's also another big part of the application that a lot of students dread, and that's the essays. 2 types of essays. One is the Common Application Personal Statement. This is a 650-word essay where you really get to lay out the personal attributes that make you who you are. This is not an essay to brag about your accomplishments. There's another part of the application for that. It's not where you talk about your academic goals. That's what the supplement's for. I'll get to that in a second. Instead, the Common App essay is a chance to talk about the attributes that make you likable. What do admissions people view as likable? Not a whole lot different than you and I. If they meet and you meet someone who is resilient, who's overcome obstacles in their life, we tend to like those people. People that have a setback and get back up on their feet, that's likable. Students that are genuinely curious, who are doing things not because they're required to, but building up their interest in the summer because they genuinely are interested in that area. They love that. We all care about and like people that are empathetic and caring and compassionate. Being able to demonstrate this side of you in an essay or somewhere in your application can make a big difference. Taking the initiative, whether that's being a leader with a formal title or being the kind of student that just walks into a classroom and rather than sit around looking at your phone, you're in there straightening up the room and getting everything ready to go for your club meeting. You're making things happen. We all like people that make things happen around us. And so do admissions people. A few slides back, I talked about cultural awareness. Admissions people are looking to make sure that in addition to being empathetic and caring, you're actually listening to people who are different than you. These are traits that if you identify 1 or 2 of them in an essay, can really help you stand out. Now, I mentioned the supplement essays. Each institution that you're going to apply to, or at least most of them, also offer up some essay questions that are unique to their college or university. This is your opportunity usually to explain why you're interested in that school, what the roots of your academic interests are. These are shorter essays, a little bit more direct. This is a chance to really make your final case for why you belong at that institution. We work really closely with students, brainstorming to helping them with the writing and the editing to make sure all of these essays really form a good heart of the overall puzzle. Don't forget the value of letters of recommendation, cultivating teachers who can speak to your resiliency, curiosity, empathy, initiative, cultural competency. These can go a long way when someone who's in a professional setting can also comment on the potential that you have. And there's also going to be opportunities to potentially stand out, depending on the school, based on the interviews. Now, at many schools, these are conducted by alumni these days, and maybe they have less of an impact than they used to. But declining the interview, that can cause you harm. Admissions people are wondering, why did you decline this opportunity to talk to us? Make sure you attend, make sure you ask questions, make a good impression. The worst thing that can happen is you made a connection with someone that might help you down the road. Best thing is it gets added as a positive piece to your application. So lots of things that go into a decision, starting with the grades, building to activities, unique academic interests, developing the attributes, writing great essays, cultivating teachers. Here are some things I suggest that you can do to prepare for that. Early in high school, great ideas. Keep a file, even in 9th or 10th grade. What are the things that I've been involved in? What are the awards that I've won? It's amazing to me every year when we work with seniors. 12th graders, it's hard to remember what you did in 9th grade. That's ancient history. Keep track. It's really useful down the road if you've done that. And I have found that for a lot of young people, keeping track is motivating in and of itself. It helps you remind you that you're doing great things and on the right track. So start a file. Make sure you're choosing a demanding curriculum. I don't want you to stress yourself out. I don't want you to pick classes where you're going to get bad grades. But if you can get A's and B's in a demanding curriculum, you should try to push yourself, because colleges will reward you for that. When you're younger, don't be afraid to try on new activities. I know I talked about connecting the dots between your academic strengths and your goals. Yes, we want to build up this vertical resume that every year you're building on the things you're most passionate about. But colleges also want to see that you're trying to figure out what those passions might be. So they like to see a number of things early in 9th and 10th grade, and they kind of expect as you go through it that it's like a pyramid, that your passions tend to narrow in a little bit, zero in, focus in a little bit more. So don't be afraid to take risks. Parents on the call, don't be alarmed if your 9th and 10th grade students are trying on a bunch of different activities and aren't really sure yet. That's normal. As you head into 10th and 11th grade, we would want to see some more focus. End of 10th grade, going into 11th grade, test prep. Lots of great options out there. Great tutors. Khan Academy is awesome. Buy lots of books. It's repetition. It's not cramming. It's putting in the work. You will get rewarded if you put in the work. And I've already talked a lot about the value of giving testing a chance. It's an opportunity to add value. As you discover your passions, the more you can take on leadership roles, the more you can just take the initiative in the groups that you're in. Colleges value that significantly. Don't be afraid to see what you can do to make your organization better than it was before you started. That's kind of the key metric in my mind, not what your title was. What did you do to make your club, activity, organization, team better than before you joined it? Talked about teacher recommendations. Never hurts to make sure you're staying on good terms with your teachers, stay in touch with the ones you had earlier in your career. They can make a big difference in the letters of recommendation. Same too, I should note, with your guidance counselor. Your guidance counselor is required to write a letter of recommendation. If you don't know them yet, I always like to say, bring in some coffee, some donuts, get to know them some morning so that they can help you write a great letter. And then essay writing is something that I advise people to be trying to develop the ability to write good essays prior to 12th grade. I used to coach runners. It's like a muscle. The more that you can practice your writing, practice your own voice, develop stories and narrative, it'll come even more easily when it gets to 12th grade. I'm not saying you need to write your college essay as a 9th grader, but not being afraid to do writing exercises. These are things that we do with our younger students. So I know you guys can all read this. I'm not gonna read the entire thing here, but if you're in 11th or 12th grade, if you're going into 11th grade, going into 12th grade, this is a suggested timeline. I hope it's helpful for people. As you get to the end of the spring, of junior year, you certainly want to be identifying who your teachers are going to be. They're going to write letters of recommendation. Be sure to make sure, if you haven't, finished getting your SAT or ACT where you want it, that you're signing up for remaining dates so you don't get squeezed out. We like working with students as early as May or June on the common application. We're not doing the essay yet, but we're starting to build the activities and honor section so we have a more clear sense of what the admissions people will see in that section before they read your essay. And it's in June and July that we're working on the Common App essay. I haven't talked enough about the UC application. They don't use the Common App, but they have questions that they publish early in the process. Trying to get those done in the summer along with final college visits really can help you out quite a bit. It's as you get to the end of July that I'd hope your list is getting finalized, if it isn't already, having a clear sense of where you're going to go early, if anywhere, following up with teachers to make sure they're working on your letters of recommendation, so that when you get to August, you're prepared to focus on what I view as the final piece of the application itself, and that is the supplement essays for the schools that use the common application right around August 1st every year. Sometimes it's late July, but it's usually August 1st. Schools released their supplement essays for the next cycle. Oftentimes they're the same as the previous year, but last year there were a lot of changes because of the Supreme Court decision. And so if you've got your Common App, you've got your UC application all set, all you've got left in August and September and October, and this is what our students experience, all you're doing is focusing on these supplement essays. I mentioned on the previous slide, this is kind of your final argument to make. Let's make sure you have the time to really focus on the supplement essays. I see too many students starting the common application and the supplements at the same time in senior year. That's really hard to make sure all those pieces come together nicely. And then we get ready for interviews. We're submitting our early round applications in mid to late October, finishing up remaining regular decision applications over the next couple months, hopefully being done well before the holidays so that you can sit back. And I know it's hard to wait, but at least you're not going to be stressing out because you've carefully gone through each step. So it's a jigsaw puzzle. I've used this analogy a few times. One way to think of a jigsaw puzzle is, at least the way I was taught how to do jigsaw puzzles when I was a kid, was you look for the pieces that are the edges. You create the box, and then you fill in the pieces in the middle. Well, I always like to ask students, well, what do these readers know about you? Well, they don't know anything before they open it up. But the first thing they're going to see is the outlines. And the outlines are your grades, your test scores, your activities, your awards. The essays are what come next. That's the stuff that fills out this picture. They've kind of got a good framework for you based on your grades and activities, and these are critical. If these aren't good, they might not even get to the essay, but it's the essay where you really get to fill it in. And this is where I want my students, we talk about this all the time, we're going to play chess with the essays, not checkers. What do I mean by that? We're asking ourselves not what is the easiest common application prompt to write about. They give you 7, you pick 1. Instead, we're asking them, what else don't they know about me? What else do I want them to know? What else matters about me? We're going to brainstorm on the attributes that need to be in the center of the story. Then we're going to go back and pick the prompt that best allows us to answer the question. It's checkers, it's not chess. I'm sure if you just took the easiest question, you'd write a great essay. But is that the best possible essay for your application? Not necessarily. We're going to come up with what we want to say, what's the middle of our jigsaw puzzle, and then we're going to figure out the best prompt for that. Be likable in that essay, focus on the attributes I've already mentioned, and you're going to have something that's very memorable. And then when we get to the supplement essays, that's the final piece of the middle part of this jigsaw puzzle, where you can very directly and very specifically focus on your fit and your goals at that particular school. So if there's a few things you take away from today before I hand this back off to Matthew and to Nigel, focus on school, do great in school. I know you've heard that since you were a little kid, and parents, I know you're encouraging your students to do that, but that's really important. Challenging curriculum first and foremost, focus on the testing, even in a test optional environment, it still matters. We want our applicants to be likable. We want the admissions committee to say, wow, that's someone we'd like to have in our classroom. I'd like to be able to meet that student at an event. They're likable. These attributes of resilience, curiosity, empathy, initiative, cultural awareness, they are so much more important in an essay and sprinkled throughout your application than really any accomplishment. And of course, many of your accomplishments are just a direct result of these attributes. Plan ahead with activities, but don't be afraid to take risks. know that not everything needs to be set in stone, but when you get to your upper class years, we're going to start building this vertical resume, if you will, matching your strengths and your academic goals and building up this really tall building, if you will, instead of a bunch of low buildings. It's horizontal where there's a number of things you're pretty good at. We want to be able to emphasize that you've got one or two things that are really stand out. And don't forget what I said about playing chess, not checkers. Just as a final reminder, if students want to learn more about the services that we offer a consult to be able to explain how we might be able to help your family. We don't charge for those consults. We just ask that if you sign up for it, we'd love to meet the students, but we do expect that the parents also are on those consults so we can address everybody's questions and explain how if you want to work with us, that we would be best served to help you. You see the link to our website, and again, the QR code will take you to the website as well. I'm looking forward to taking questions in a minute, but before that, I want to pass back the baton here to Matthew and to Nigel, because I want to hear a little bit more about the great things that they do, and we'll go from there.
Of course, thank you so much, Artie. I mean, I wish I had you when I was going through my process. I mean, you would have maybe I've gone somewhere else beyond. I didn't get that in many schools, so maybe I would have gone somewhere else. But definitely picking up on Artie, I mean, definitely the resources he has are fantastic, and the advice regarding you want to start early, you want to play chess, not checkers. Definitely speaks highly to kind of what the admission cycle has turned out to be. I think as already mentioned, through maybe a lot of outside factors, but every year there's more applications and more people that are interested in these universities, and building yourself in a very authentic light very early on. Maybe if you have a switch regarding what you like, that obviously that's a very natural then. I mean, as already mentioned, you might have a major when you apply. I was originally a government major, now I switched over. I was economics for a while, now I'm philosophy, so you're bound to switch your interests, but always being able to have the chance to explore them is definitely possible. And so that's what we hope to do with a few exciting summer opportunities we have here on the Harvard Crimson Gold programs, and we're very happy to give the opportunity to give more light on one of our highlights during the summer. It's a native conference, our Summer Journalism Academy. It's a fantastic opportunity for participants to immerse themselves in the ins and outs of running the collegiate newspaper. We try to give the largest collegiate independent newspaper there is. We try to give participants the opportunity to really immerse themselves and learn journalism, and learn not even journalism but beyond those interests. And journalism is a very broad opportunity. Many participants, I think think of journalism in a very traditional sense of you're writing for the newspaper, and well, that is what journalism is in some degree, to some definition. Journalism goes a lot more than that. Whether it's photojournalism, whether it's taking the photos for stories, whether it's the technology behind how journalism interacts with people. Today unfortunately not many people pick up a newspaper nowadays in hand. A lot of it is engaged with on a virtual setting. And so, that's what we hope to kind of bring to participants, whether you're a 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, even if you might be a rising senior as well, too, giving you the opportunity to really kind of explore something new, and, give really a cornerstone stone to your college application. So give a more formal overview on SJA. So it's our, native conference. It's our large native summer conference that we run here at the Harvard Crimson, both in person and virtually. And we really try to teach and focus on the fundamentals of journalism. So whether it's article writing, whether it's beat reporting practices, so best reporting practices, and even revenue generation, how newspapers are sustained, and the business models that have had the change of just not even journalism companies and newspapers, but entertainment as a whole. Ever since the shift, I think pretty much that I will argue was happening before COVID, but definitely was put to a really fast pace after COVID. And so, it's an opportunity to really learn from, the people who write the newspaper themselves. We have, our editors, we have our president there, we have, our summer business team there, which Nigel's a part of, to allow, participants to have the opportunity to ask these questions and immerse themselves in, practices and the fundamentals of journalism as a whole. So it's happening from July 8th to 17th, and participants can either come in person to Cambridge if they live locally in the Boston area, or they could potentially also come, virtually as well too. We want to have our programs be as accessible as possible. And so, definitely it's still the same experience, whether, you're virtually, participating or you're in person. And participants will be very fortunate enough to participate in multiple workshops, seminars, panels with esteemed speakers. We have a speaker, I believe, coming from the New York Times, who will be able to shed, more light on her, time both at the New York Times, as a journalist coming, coming up from, working herself up, and other panels, and in-person reporting opportunities. Our conference, cultivates in a comprehensive portfolio, whether it's journalism portfolio, that can be a very solid supplement when it comes to colleges, comes to publications. If you might be interested in submitting a publication, you might be able to win an award that might shine some more fantastic light on your college admissions, resume and application as a whole. Might be an opportunity for you to talk about, an opportunity you might be able to talk about whether your supplementals as well too, as already mentioned, which are just so pivotal and so monumental to be able to get into the schools you might dream of, given just just really trying to give yourself the best edge regarding how much personality you can put out there, that the admissions counselor really reflects and really engages with your story. So just some example workshops on the right side, journalism, the fundamental, the ethics. We have something that we really enjoy running. We ran this. I was very fortunate enough to run this, not too long ago. It was our breaking news simulation, and so that's where we literally in the middle of the conference will yell breaking news, and you will fill the shoes of a reporter who there's a story that just came out, and you have to go and call up multiple sources. You have to confirm details. You got to write the story, and you're really got to really experience the adrenaline that might come with the actual ins and outs of a newspaper. An opportunity, as I mentioned, to get to know the Crimson, the Crimson board. And we have, very fortunate enough to have 10 boards of the Crimson, and they range from tech, they range from op-eds, they range from news, business, media, multimedia, more interested in shorter media content. So such as blogs, that's also a board as well too. You really get to know them, you get to engage with them. And you kind of get to be able to develop, some fantastic work and supplementals with them. So, pitch and news article workshops, kind of how you go about, what our process is of pitching stories in the Harvard Crimson. You get to do that, on your own. You get to make up your own story. You get to hear, some great stories of news stories that almost got, picked up, stories that didn't get picked up, and kind of learn why or why not those didn't get picked up, and kind of what's reflected because of that. We have a design workshop that kind of teaches you more of the design features of of journalism, whether it's kind of how do people, very niche topic, but how does the layout of the newspaper psychologically affect the way people engage with media? Very niche question, but obviously elements of that, and whether it's the design of assets and pictures that might go next to a story and might supplement it. We're very fortunate enough to kind of teach that element. And another one is run the college newspaper, fireside chat. Get to speak with our president, Sellers, who has been with the Harvard Crimson since he was a freshman, and he's been worked himself up on the editorial side to not be the president. And obviously you get to learn a lot from both his time of writing some stories that were pretty breaking news stories, and were on the front page of the Harvard Crimson every week. We print every week, so very fortunate enough to get to see your work there. But now obviously running the whole show is a whole nother hat to wear. So those are just some example workshops. We really try to immerse ourselves and give participants the opportunity to immerse themselves within the ins and outs of journalism, just give a nice opportunity to explore it over a 2-week period. So as I mentioned, it's from the 18th to the 17th. There is no programming on weekends. It runs from 9 to 1, and obviously there's breaks in between for lunch and other activities. And we normally, have our admissions, price for our conference at $950, but we're very happy to give a discounted rate of 30% for $650 for webinar participants. There's a QR code on the right side that will direct you to a form that will kind of get you started on the application just the process of registration for the conference. A big note I want to put out there is that we have the option for financial aid when it comes to our conferences, and we're very proud to have that option as the Harvard Crimson. as already said, obviously we want to give students the opportunity to really immerse themselves in any experience, at a very young age, especially. And we don't want, financial, burdens or of anything of that sort to really deter a student from potentially finding a passion, who might, that might turn, for example, as already was mentioned, the girl they took from the one high school who got, the A, who somehow got the A in that English class. She was pretty good. She was obviously the editor in chief of her paper, got into Cornell, was the editor in chief there of the Cornell paper there, and now obviously has won a Pulitzer Prize, which is obviously kind of a very remarkable feat within the field of journalism. So that's kind of the same story we want to have from our conferences, and our opportunities is to really have students kind of deep dive a lot more into those opportunities. But we don't want to have financial burdens be a factor within that immersiveness and participation. So the form is there. It requires just a few details. There is a box that asks you if you will be potentially filing for financial aid. Once you fill that out, we will email you with next steps, and we will very be happy to take it on from there. So yeah, I mean, that's just a quick overview on it's a quick overview. I'm sorry, I just saw the chat is does everybody see my screen? I just want to confirm, Nigel.
I can see it.
Okay.
This is already
Perfect.
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah.
No worries at all. We might be able to send it out after the webinar, just to ensure that everybody has access to it. But yeah, I mean, obviously, as already mentioned, we kind of want to open the floor to some questions, both on both from us, Nigel and I as students, but we also want to hear any questions. Obviously, a lot of questions in the chat box regarding to admissions, and obviously some very great material there. So obviously, Kevin, if you want to moderate here, I'm not too sure kind of how the best process is here, but obviously, I think all of us are happy to kind of take on some potential questions, and more than happy to kind of open the floor for any questions.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. We've been kind of answering them as we go, but there's a couple that I wanted to just throw out there. The first one has to do with AP exam scores, and the person asks, can high AP exam scores make up for not submitting the SAT or the ACT?
So thank you for this question. It's a really good one, and there's a little bit of nuance to it. So look, submitting strong AP exam results is only a positive. Let's not forget, however, that the AP exams themselves were originally set up not as an admissions tool, but as an opportunity for high school students to earn college credit. That's what they're designed for. However, if you're getting 4s and 5s and you've done a lot of APs, in addition to the fact that the admissions committee is happy that you took a lot of highly advanced classes, the most advanced class probably at your particular school. If you're then getting 4s and 5s, that's a real positive. And I believe it is Yale in going back to requiring standardized testing. You can still choose at Yale, I believe it's Yale this year, not to submit SAT and ACT if you are submitting APs in their stead. And so I don't want to suggest that for all institutions, it's a straight player swap here. Okay, to use a sports expression, it's not quite that, but yes, if you're doing great on APs and for whatever reason you just haven't been able to do great on the SATs or the ACTs, submitting the APs is the next best thing, and at some institutions it may be viewed very similarly. I'm a little skeptical, I will admit, with Yale saying, sure, you don't have to do the SAT, we'll take the AP. Yes, it's going to help you, but I still would tell you the SAT is, again, the admissions exam. The AP exam is just showing that you've earned college credit. So SAT is still a little bit better, but awesome if you've done well in the AP. Go for it, submit them. That's better than not having any kind of standardized test for sure. Kevin, were there some other ones you wanted me to take?
Yeah, so there's one in terms of kind of student evaluation. So the registrant or the participant would like to know who's going to be evaluated higher. A student that takes a lot of difficult virtual classes, but isn't really all that active in terms of clubs and organizations, but is in the top 10 of the class, versus a student that takes the same types of classes, but does them in person at school, is much more involved extracurricularly, and is in the top 5 of the class.
So on the surface, the second student seems to be a little bit better in each metric. I would be curious what these virtual classes are. Are
Mhm.
they classes at a local college? That might provide some perspective. I would also add, though, depending on the size of the high school and the nature of the high school, 2 students in the top 10, that's pretty good. Like there's not a lot of daylight in between them academically, unless there's only 15 kids at the school. But if there's hundreds of kids at the school, 5th ranked and 10th ranked are, both pretty darn good. But it sure does seem to me that the second one is a little bit better. And what might be breaking the tie, if we were to say ranked 5th and ranked 10th, weird things in the curriculum make the ranks kind of a wash. The tiebreaker clearly is one of the students is a lot more engaged and active. I've said a couple other times tonight, the best predictor of what will happen is what has happened. When you go to college, and our colleagues on the call tonight from the Harvard Crimson can tell you, you're not only going to go to class, and admissions people know that. You're going to be involved in a lot of things, and they want you to be involved in a lot of things. And if you haven't demonstrated the ability to juggle a lot of those things in high school, that's a little bit of a concern. So it does seem to me that the second student is a little bit better. Yes.
Great. In terms of kind of where a student, what country a student comes from, how much of that is sort of, I know coming from a financial aid background, there are certain implications in terms of what types of aid an international student might be eligible for. And I know it's probably more of a subjective thing from school to school. Can you talk a little bit about how admissions offices will sort of look at international students?
Sure. And I do have to drop the caveat that it does depend a little bit on the institution.
Sure.
Private institutions that are looking to build national and internationally diverse student bodies, from an admissions perspective, your citizenship is not really something that's considered right off the bat. But again, where did you go to high school? If you're a UK citizen going to high school in Boston, you're being compared against other students in Boston, not other UK kids. If you're a UK citizen going to high school in the UK, you're being compared against those UK kids there. So it's really, from an admissions perspective, it's less citizenship at these highly selective private institutions that are recruiting around the world. It's less citizenship instead of where did you go to high school. But you raised a great point, Kevin. Financial aid wise, that's very different. Some institutions are fortunate with their endowments that they don't make a distinction in terms of someone's citizenship. Harvard's fortunate enough that if you qualify for financial aid, doesn't matter what country you're a citizen of, you're going to be considered fairly for need-based financial aid, regardless of citizenship. There's a number of other, however, really elite private institutions, top 25 schools in US News, that actually can't do that, that they can't consider students who are citizens outside the US for need-based financial aid. They just don't have the resources for that. That's separate from their admissions decision. They might admit you, and then financial aid becomes a separate ballgame. I want to add that I've been talking a lot through the glasses of these selective private institutions, and what the University of Michigan, what the University of Rhode Island, what the University of North Carolina, what Penn State would do in this particular situation might be very different. And remember that these state institutions have a real commitment, an obligation, in fact, a mandate would be the better word, to provide an education for the people in their state. And those students are always going to have an advantage over not just non-US students, but students from the foreign states, if that makes sense, from the out-of-state students, right? So there's a number of things that go into this. I think it's important to look at the type of institution. The more competitive, selective, the private institution, I would not be so worried about someone's citizenship to get in. However, the question of whether they would give you a financial aid package is an important one to ask. And their websites will be very clear on this if you go look at their financial aid pages. Kevin, were those the
Thank you for
remaining
that.
questions from the Q&A, or were there any others?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
those are the outstanding questions that we weren't able to answer in the Q&A that we thought we'd share with you now. So thanks for answering those.
Yeah, of course. Matthew and Nigel, what did I miss tonight, if that you guys would want to hear more about?
Of course, yeah. I think definitely a very interesting one that I remember kind of yield protection and kind of having, the kind of the classic example of, obviously, for example, for me, I really wanted to go to a school on my list was American. And funny enough, I applied early to Harvard, got in, and I got a rejection letter from American. I was like, wow, okay. It was a school that I was, if they gave me a package of some sort, maybe financially, scholarship wise, I would have heavily considered it. So, is that, I'm not, obviously I'm a few years removed from the process. So, if you have any insight regarding that, if that's just maybe I got unlucky, maybe my story didn't maybe resonate with the admissions reader. Just I guess any insight on that would obviously be very helpful.
I'm so glad you brought this up. So, yield aware, yield protecting, however you want to call this, it's a reality for many schools. Not all, but for many schools that are selective. So what does this actually mean? And this is sometimes shocking to people to hear this, but some of the best schools that are selective are not necessarily going to admit the very best applicants. Why is that? They want some evidence that you're going to attend. And there's sometimes a fear that with a certain set of test scores, certain kind of resume, whatever it might be, that you're going to get in, you meaning the applicant, to a school that might be more desirable in the rankings. And so if they admit you, they're wasting, I'm putting this in air quotes, that admit spot. Why is it a waste? Because the thing that many of these schools that are yield aware are sensitive to are their rankings. And the way that a lot of these ranking places their metrics, it's not just their admit rate. A lower admit rate often helps a school climb the rankings. It's also something called their yield, the percentage of students that are admitted, how high a percentage of those students are going to come. Now, the Ivy League schools tend to have very, very high yield rates. They give great financial aid packages. People dream about them. I'm not saying that they're the only ones that people should be dreaming about, because there's a ton of others, believe me, but I'm just using them as an example. They have very high yield rates. Very few people turn them down, and it's hard to get into multiple Ivies. So you're not seeing that. Harvard has an extremely high yield rate. Yale, Stanford, right? They do. They're not yield aware. They know they're going to get a healthy percentage, and they're just not worried about that. But you see some other schools that, again, are good selective schools that are sensitive to that, and they care about the yield percentage. And then I'll also be maybe a little less, this sounds a little harsh, a little cynical. The other reality is that they're trying to build a class, and they're trying to fill dorm rooms and not overpopulate their dorm rooms. And it's a science, but it's also an art, and it's a real challenge for people that are managing the enrollment. And so sometimes, they're just not going to admit you because he or she is not coming. Let's just take them out of the equation. Let's really focus on people we think are going to come. So a way to get around that, if it's a school that is a backup school, or just a school that's really appealing, just on the numbers, in theory, is easier to get into, is one, to do an extra great job on the supplement essays, make the connections clear, do a visit, sign up for a tour, send an email to an admissions officer in advance, make it clear that your demonstrated interest goes beyond just putting in an application. You're not treating them as a safety school. And then, Matthew, sometimes it is just bad luck. That sometimes happens, but a lot of the really weird decisions that we see like this, they got in there, but not here. Oftentimes, this yield protection, this yield aware is one way to explain it, or just understand that they have a challenge with enrollment. And if they don't think you're coming, they got to get the roommates in the dorm, and it's just easier for them to move on. Thanks for that.
Artie, I've got a couple of other really great questions here in the chat. We talk about unique academic interests, and a parent has a specific question about biology, and how we would go about coaching a student, with biology being one of the more competitive majors. What other types of majors are closely related? Obviously things like environmental science, some of those other types. Were there other ones that you would recommend?
Yeah.
In that particular situation?
Of course, this will vary from school to school, and some smaller liberal arts colleges might not have the variety that I'm going to say, but a lot of research universities have related majors to biology and society, or within the biology major, there's several different concentrations, from human biology to animal biology to cell biology to molecular, whatever it might be. And a student really being able to hone in on one area of biology can make a significant difference in standing out in these very popular lines. And I would distinguish that, I just kind of caught a glimpse of the question. I would distinguish that between pre-med, which also is a very popular thing for students to talk about. Pre-med is not actually a major. And I'm not one of these counselors who tell students they should not talk about their ambitions to be a doctor, but it is a little bit of a higher bar to explain why at a young age you want to be a doctor and come up with a reason that hasn't been said 100 times, that admissions person hasn't read 100 times already in the last week. And so when students can, if they're interested in bio or pre-med, also add a secondary interest. Maybe it's a liberal arts college that really only has biology and maybe only has environmental science. Can you also talk up the fact that you were a staff writer for the newspaper in school and that you have an interest in taking writing classes? Can you also talk about your interests in a different science that's maybe a little bit, not so much competitive, but a little bit less popular? Maybe that's physics, although that's a pretty popular one still. But what's the secondary interest that you can put into that supplement essay as well?
And then there's another one here that I think is really good. What is the weight of summer internships and programs relative to school year extracurricular programs?
Wow, that's a really good question. It's hard to quantify that, like one gets 5 points and the other one only gets 4 points, that kind of thing. But I will say this, as you get older in high school, being able to provide evidence on your resume that you have done activities that are independent of your peer group really stand out. So when we see kids doing an internship in the summer or some sort of research project, by definition, for an older high school kid, I'm not talking 9th and 10th grade, I'm talking about going into 11th grade or going into 12th grade. By definition, you're not sitting in a classroom. So by definition, you're the only one doing this. Like it's great to do throughout high school programs with other high school kids. But if you can find 1 or 2 things that are a little bit more independent, you're the only one doing it. You're trying to stand out. You're trying to show them something that other people haven't done. So let's be clear. I'm not suggesting that people don't do summer programs at colleges. I've already talked about how those are valuable. But if you can find something when you get older that makes you more independent, it's usually easier to do those things in the summer. So that's the primary value there. But if you did that in the summer and were not engaged in your high school community extracurricularly during the school year, that's kind of a weird red flag too. So I'm going to say that you really want to try to do both. They each have their own place in this puzzle, and that's not a cop-out. It's just to say there are different times of the year. You have different goals at those times of the year. In the school year, be a leader amongst your peers. In the summer, what can you do to differentiate yourself from your peers at your high school? And that's where, again, whether it's an independent internship or going away to a college program somewhere else where the other kids at your high school don't do it, these are ways to stand out.
Great. Thank you for that, Artie. That is all I'm seeing right now in the chat in terms of questions. But thank you so much, everyone, for those great questions.
Matthew and Nigel, any last questions you guys want to ask before we let everybody go?
I'm all good, Nigel. If you have maybe anything from your experience, I know you're not too far. You're more closer to your process than I was. So if you have anything you would like to maybe reminisce on, or anything that you believe was missed over, kind of the floor is yours.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of kind of what you talked about, Mr. Smith was very, very kind of close to try to what I, some of the things I wish I had known too. But a lot of them kind of just sticking to your story and what you do well, and not trying to do too much and get out of what your zone is, I think is, maybe what made me successful. I'm not sure, but you spend a lot of time in this, and I think one thing that I think for me, I don't know if this had a huge impact, but it just something that I felt made me more proud of my application was kind of what you're just talking about with summer opportunities. I was I try to do things, especially my junior summer, that I was just really interested in, and that I thought was interesting. Maybe it looked good on a resume, but just something that you know, I did something with like a business program and like worked at a company and like just really found that work like quite interesting and like, you know, something that maybe I was able to talk about and write about in an essay, but like I think things like that may have been helpful to me.
Nigel, these are great themes that I propose we end on. One that I heard from you that I couldn't agree with more is stick to your passions and ignore the noise of everybody else is doing. Follow your instincts, build your story.
Yeah.
It's great advice, and truly it's what the admissions people are looking for. You're trying to stand out. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. You know, follow your passions. Sounds like you did that, and you guys were successful in this process. I bet if you went back and look at that, it's been a couple of years, but if you looked at that stuff, there's going to be evidence of with both of you guys, your curiosity and following your dreams and passions. That's what we always want to see young people do. And I hope in this crazy process, it's reassuring to know that if you do that, that is what helps. Following your passions, following your dreams. So thanks for that story, Nigel. Matthew, thank you. I want to also thank all of our attendees, and just going to wish everybody a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.